Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Here you'll find quiet, atmospheric narratives about hidden places, difficult choices, and the moments that change lives. If you enjoy stories that unfold slowly and stay with you long after they end, explore the other videos on the channel and share this one with someone who appreciates thoughtful storytelling. Erin Walker had learned to measure her days in margins. Margins of time between shifts at the clinic, margins of money left after rent and groceries, margins of patience stretched thin by exhaustion she could never quite explain to anyone else. Pittsburgh moved around her with practiced indifference, its bridges carrying people who seemed certain of where they were going, its streets lined with houses that belonged to someone else. The apartment she rented sat above a closed storefront, its windows facing a brick wall across the alley. Morning light reached the kitchen late and left early, and by winter it often felt as though the sun never truly arrived at all. She woke before her alarm most days, already alert, already calculating. There was coffee to stretch, lunches to pack, a school bus schedule that could not be missed. Her son, Noah, moved through the mornings quietly, not because he was timid, but because he had learned that silence helped. He did his homework at the small table by the window in the evenings, his concentration unbroken by the hum of traffic below or the distant sirens that marked time in the city better than any clock. Erin watched him often, struck by how naturally he adapted to instability, how easily he accepted that things changed without warning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through the narrow slot in the door sometime between dawn and mid-morning. Erin found it when she returned from her shift, her coat still on, her bag heavy on her shoulder. It was thicker than the usual envelopes, folded awkwardly, its edges softened as if it had traveled farther than the address suggested. She almost set it aside with the rest of the mail. Bills and notices she already understood too well, but the return address caught her attention. It carried a county name she had not seen in years, one she associated more with maps than memory. She opened it standing in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming beside her, the smell of reheated soup lingering in the air. The language inside was formal and precise, stripped of any attempt at kindness. It informed her that she was the sole remaining heir to a parcel of land registered under the name Loretta Walker, deceased. The property included a residential structure described as non-standard. Coordinates were listed instead of a street address. A deadline followed, firm and indifferent, by which the inheritance would need to be claimed or declined. Erin read the letter twice before sitting down. The chair beneath her creaked, its sound unusually loud in the small room. Noah looked up from his homework, his pencil paused mid-line, his eyes searching her face for meaning she had not yet found herself. She smiled reflexively, the expression automatic and hollow, and told him to keep working. Her grandmother had been dead for nearly 3 years. There had been no service worth calling a funeral, no gathering of relatives, no dispersal of possessions. Loretta Walker had lived alone for most of her life, moving occasionally but never settling where people expected her to. When she was spoken of at all, it was usually with a mixture of mild embarrassment and dismissal, as though her choices reflected a stubborn refusal to be sensible. As a child, Erin had found her grandmother unsettling. Loretta's house had always felt too quiet, too deliberate, as though every object had been placed with intention that went unspoken. There were no decorations for the sake of cheer, no clutter to soften the edges of space. As an adult, Erin had learned to stop asking questions about her. It was easier to let the woman exist as a vague figure on the margins of family history, someone whose life did not intersect with hers in any meaningful way. Until now. The letter did not explain why the inheritance had surfaced so late, nor did it offer any reassurance about its value. It did not speak of comfort or opportunity. It simply existed, demanding response. Erin folded it carefully and set it beside the sink, then moved through the rest of the evening on instinct. She cooked dinner, listened to Noah talk about school, about a project he didn't understand yet, about a boy who had shoved him in the hallway. She responded in the right places, nodded when expected, but her thoughts had already begun circling elsewhere, drawn to the coordinates printed in black ink. After Noah went to bed, Erin opened her laptop and searched the county name. The map loaded slowly, resolving into a stretch of land that looked almost empty. Roads thinned as they moved inward, branching into lines that seemed more theoretical than functional. The area lay deep in the Appalachian foothills, far from major towns, far from the networks she relied on without thinking. Scattered comments appeared on forums and local listings, offering little more than warnings. Harsh winters, limited services, poor soil, a place people passed through or left behind when they could. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, the glow of the screen fading from the room. Declining the inheritance would be easy. It would require a signature, a form, a stamp. The land would return to the county, the house to neglect. Claiming it meant responsibility she did not fully understand, uncertainty she could not easily quantify, and the risk of uprooting Noah for something that might offer nothing in return. She imagined the neighbors' reactions, the raised eyebrows, the unspoken judgment. She imagined herself explaining the decision and felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The next morning she filled out the forms. The decision surprised her with how quietly it settled. There was no surge of resolve, no dramatic sense of change. It felt less like choosing and more like stepping into something that had already been set in motion. By the time she mailed the documents, the apartment no longer felt like shelter. It felt provisional in a way that went beyond leases and furniture. The walls seemed thinner, the ceiling lower. The city pressed in on her with new insistence. 2 weeks later, they were on the road. Erin's car was old but dependable, its trunk packed with what caution allowed. Clothes, blankets, canned food, notebooks, tools she barely remembered how to use. Noah sat in the back seat, his forehead pressed to the window, watching the city dissolve behind them. Bridges gave way to hills, traffic to open stretches of road, where movement slowed and the sense of distance shifted. The farther they traveled, the less the miles mattered. What counted instead was the absence of signs, the gradual thinning of noise, the way the world seemed to exhale as they moved into it. Her phone lost signal somewhere beyond the last recognizable intersection. Erin turned it off, feeling an unexpected relief as the screen went dark. The road narrowed, its surface rougher, less certain. By late afternoon, they reached the coordinates listed in the letter. The land revealed itself gradually, without markers or fences. Only subtle changes in the way the ground rose and fell. A line of stones half buried in earth suggested a boundary that had long since stopped insisting on itself. The house did not announce itself. It sat low against the land, its shape simple, its presence restrained. It looked smaller than Erin had imagined, its proportions modest, almost apologetic. Logs fitted together with careful precision formed its walls, their age evident but not their weakness. A deep overhang sheltered the front, supported by thick wooden posts. A stone chimney rose nearby, detached from the main structure, its purpose not immediately clear. Stacked firewood formed a rough barrier against the wind, arranged with more thought than decoration. Noah stepped out of the car first, standing still as he took it in. Erin watched him, aware that his reaction mattered more than her own. He did not laugh or frown. He simply observed, absorbing the details without judgment. Erin followed, the ground firm beneath her boots, the air carrying the scent of damp earth and leaves. The forest pressed close but not tightly, trees spaced in a way that suggested deliberation rather than wild growth. Inside, the house felt different from what its size suggested. The air was steady, neither warm nor cold, carrying a faint earthy smell without dampness. Light entered through narrow windows set deep into the walls, softening as it spread. The space flowed without clear divisions, shaped by use rather than design convention. Built-in shelves curved with the walls, their surfaces worn smooth. A sleeping nook occupied one side, its depth suggesting insulation rather than confinement. Erin stood still, listening. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with enough force to make itself known, but inside the sound softened, as if absorbed. The quiet was not empty. It was deliberate. She felt a cautious calm settle over her, tempered by doubt she did not yet have language for. This was not comfort, it was something else, something she could not yet define. As evening approached, a truck appeared on the road, slowing as it passed. A man leaned out, his expression openly curious. Others followed over the next hour, drawn by the sight of newcomers. Their reactions were immediate and unfiltered. Amusement flickered across faces as they took in the size of the house. Skepticism followed. They asked if Erin planned to stay through winter, if she understood what the cold was like here, if she had seen the structure closely. When she mentioned the external stone hearth, disbelief replaced laughter. Erin listened, nodded, thanked them for their concern. She did not defend the house. She did not yet know how. As night fell, she and Noah settled inside the small space, the temperature unchanged despite the drop outside. Erin lay awake longer than she intended, listening, waiting for cold to creep in through unseen cracks. It did not. Instead, a fragile sense of possibility took hold, tempered by the awareness that whatever she had inherited was not simply land or shelter. It was a choice already unfolding, one that would demand more of her than she had yet given. By morning, she understood that this decision could not be undone easily. The road back remained open, but something had already shifted. The house waited, indifferent to doubt, ready to reveal itself only as much as necessity required. Morning came without ceremony. There was no sharp division between night and day, only a gradual thinning of darkness that made the interior of the house slowly legible. Erin woke before Noah, lying still for a moment, listening. The wind had shifted overnight, brushing the exterior with a steady insistence that would have rattled the windows of her old apartment. Here it softened as it passed over the structure, reduced to a distant presence rather than an intrusion. She noticed this without fully understanding it, filed it away as another detail that did not yet connect to anything else. She rose quietly and moved through the small space, testing it by repetition. Every step felt deliberate, as though the house required attention in exchange for cooperation. The floor was firm and cool beneath her feet, but not unpleasantly so. The air had not grown colder overnight. It had not grown warmer either. It simply remained unchanged, as if time behaved differently here. Erin had expected to wake tense and alert, braced for discomfort. Instead, she felt cautious, watchful, but not threatened. Noah woke soon after, sitting up in the sleeping nook and rubbing his eyes. He looked around as if orienting himself, then smiled faintly, more curious than reassured. Erin watched him closely, alert to any sign of fear or regret. She saw none. He moved through the space slowly, touching the walls, examining the shelves, peering out through the narrow windows. He noticed things she would have dismissed, the way light pooled on the floor rather than spreading evenly, the way sound behaved when he shifted his weight. He did not comment on the size of the house. He accepted it as given. Outside, the land looked different in daylight. What she had taken for emptiness revealed subtle structure. The ground sloped gently away from the house, channeling water downhill rather than toward the foundation. Stones had been placed deliberately, not to decorate but to redirect movement, to mark where the land wanted to go. The ring of stacked firewood served more than one purpose. It broke the wind, shed moisture, and defined a boundary without enclosing it. The forest beyond stood at a careful distance, close enough to offer resources, far enough to avoid shadowing the house completely. The stone hearth stood apart from the main structure, solid and exposed beneath a shallow overhang. Erin approached it with unease. Fire to her belonged indoors. It was something watched closely, controlled by walls and vents, by systems that announced their presence clearly. An outdoor hearth felt like an admission of vulnerability, an unnecessary risk. She inspected it carefully, noting the soot-darkened stone, the way the opening angled away from prevailing winds, the broad surface designed to radiate heat outward rather than upward. It did not look neglected. It looked used. By late morning, the road grew active again. Neighbors appeared in ones and twos, drawn by curiosity rather than obligation. They did not hide their reactions. Their eyes lingered on the house, measuring it against expectations formed by decades of winters. The structure was too small, too low, too unconventional to inspire confidence. Some laughed openly. Others shook their heads with the quiet certainty of people who believed they had already seen how this would end. Erin listened as they spoke about snowdrifts that buried doors, about nights when the temperature dropped without warning, about furnaces that failed at the worst possible moment. Their concerns were not unkind, but they carried an undercurrent of judgment. They asked whether she planned to stay through winter, whether she had experience with the cold, whether she understood how unforgiving the land could be. When she mentioned the external hearth, disbelief replaced concern. The idea of relying on an outdoor fire to heat a house struck them as not only impractical but dangerous. She did not argue. She did not defend the house or her decision. She did not yet know how. She thanked them for the information, stored their warnings alongside her own doubts, and watched as they drove away, leaving tracks that would soon fade back into the dirt road. Noah observed the exchanges silently, absorbing tone rather than words. He sensed the dismissal, even if he did not fully understand it. That afternoon, Erin set about learning the house by use rather than inspection. She unpacked what little they had brought, placing items where they seemed to belong, rather than forcing them into arbitrary order. The shelves accepted their contents without complaint. The table fixed to the floor suggested a center of activity rather than decoration. Everything felt restrained, pared down to function. There was nothing to hide behind here. Every object mattered. As evening approached, the temperature outside dropped quickly. Erin noticed it when she stepped out to gather water, the air sharpening against her skin. Inside, the change was minimal. She waited for the cold to announce itself, to seep in through corners or settle near the floor. It did not. The house held its equilibrium with quiet insistence. Erin felt a flicker of relief, quickly tempered by caution. One mild night proved nothing. She lit a small fire in the stone hearth as the light faded, doing so carefully, almost reluctantly. The wood caught easily, flames steady and controlled. Heat radiated outward, warming her hands and face. She waited for smoke to drift toward the house, for the smell of burning to intrude. It did not. Inside, the change was subtle. There was no immediate rush of warmth. Instead, the air seemed to deepen, to grow more stable rather than hotter. Erin could not explain it, but she felt it. That night, they slept again without incident. The wind rose, pressing harder against the exterior, but the interior remained still. Noah fell asleep quickly, exhaustion overtaking curiosity. Erin lay awake longer, listening, counting the seconds between gusts, waiting for the house to betray its weaknesses. None appeared. The walls did not creak or flex. They absorbed sound rather than reflecting it. The quiet was not empty. It was deliberate. Over the next days, the pattern repeated. Mornings dawned gently, the light shifting rather than arriving. The temperature inside remained remarkably consistent despite fluctuations outside. Erin began to understand that the house did not respond quickly. It did not chase comfort. It maintained balance. When she built the fire too hot, the effect was wasted, heat escaping without benefit. When she built it too low, the response lagged. There was a rhythm to it, one that required observation rather than force. Noah adapted faster than she did. He stopped asking when the house would feel normal. He began to accept that this was normal, simply different. He learned where to sit when the air felt cooler, where the light lingered longest in the afternoon. He noticed that the center of the room always felt slightly warmer, though Erin dismissed this as coincidence. Children, she reminded herself, often sensed patterns where none existed. The neighbors continued to watch from a distance. Their laughter faded, replaced by skepticism that bordered on concern. They spoke among themselves about how long the newcomers would last, about whether the county would intervene. Erin sensed their doubt like a low-pressure system, persistent and unavoidable. She felt the weight of responsibility more keenly with each passing day. This was no longer just about her choices. Noah depended on her judgment, on her ability to read what the house offered and what it withheld. As the first real cold front moved in, Erin stood outside at dusk, watching the sky darken and the wind shift. The house behind her remained quiet, unassuming, its small size offering no visual reassurance. She understood then why no one took it seriously. It did not announce strength. It did not conform to the shapes people trusted. It asked to be understood rather than admired. She returned inside, closing the door carefully. The air greeted her unchanged, steady, and patient. Whatever this house was, whatever it had been built to do, it was not eager to prove itself. It would wait. The cold did not arrive all at once. It came in increments so small they might have been dismissed if Erin had not already learned to pay attention. The mornings grew sharper first, the air biting at her fingers when she stepped outside to fetch water or check the woodpile. Then the evenings lengthened, darkness settling earlier and lingering longer, pressing against the narrow windows of the house until light felt like something rationed rather than given. By the time the first snow appeared, it felt less like a surprise and more like a confirmation. Snow fell lightly at first, a thin layer that softened the land without changing its character. From inside the house, the difference was visible only in the quality of light. The world beyond the windows lost contrast, edges blurring as if the landscape itself were withdrawing. Erin watched this from the table fixed to the floor, her hands wrapped around a mug, listening to the subtle shift in silence. The house responded as it always had, not with urgency but with steadiness. The temperature inside dipped slightly, then stabilized, as though acknowledging the season rather than reacting to it. She began to understand that the house did not reward impatience. Each fire she built outside had consequences that unfolded slowly. If she burned too much wood at once, the heat seemed to escape without leaving much behind. If she was too cautious, the response lagged, and the chill crept closer than she liked. There was a balance she had not yet mastered, a rhythm that required attention rather than effort. The house did not bend to her will, it instructed. Noah adapted with a quiet ease that unsettled her. He learned the patterns of the space intuitively, choosing where to sit without explanation, gravitating towards certain spots at different times of day. He commented once that the house felt quieter when it was colder outside, a remark Erin did not know how to interpret. She told herself it was coincidence, the product of isolation and novelty. Still, she stored the observation away, alongside others that refused to align neatly. The first real test came when the power went out. There was no dramatic moment, no flicker of lights or warning alarms. The small radio Erin had brought simply fell silent, its dial useless. The charger no longer worked. The routine she had unconsciously relied on dissolved without ceremony. She had expected fear, panic, the sharp edge of vulnerability she remembered from childhood blackouts. Instead, what she felt was pressure, the knowledge that from now on, every decision would matter more. Outside, the neighboring houses grew dim one by one, generators sputtering to life in some places, failing in others. Erin watched from a distance, aware of how little the house behind her depended on any of it. The realization should have reassured her. Instead, it sharpened her awareness of everything else that could fail. Food, fuel, her own judgment. The house did not care. It continued to hold its temperature, its walls steady beneath her palm. She turned her attention inward, inventorying what they had. The built-in storage revealed more than she had initially noticed. Shelves and niches held modest supplies arranged with careful logic. Dried beans and lentils in thick cloth sacks, jars of coarse flour, bundles of herbs labeled in her grandmother's precise handwriting, root vegetables stored in a shallow pit adjacent to the house, insulated by earth and straw. Apples dried thin, berries reduced to dark, wrinkled shapes that still carried the faint scent of summer. There was salt, honey, nothing extravagant, nothing wasted. She spread everything out one afternoon, laying it on the table and along the curved shelves, counting and calculating, with a focus that left no room for guesswork. Noah watched quietly, sensing the seriousness of the task. When he asked how long it would last, Erin hesitated before answering. Reassurance felt dishonest here. She told him that if they were careful, it would see them through the winter. He nodded, absorbing the implication without protest. Cooking moved entirely outdoors. The stone hearth became the center of their routine, not as a convenience, but as a constraint. Erin learned quickly that fuel was as precious as food. Each fire had to serve multiple purposes: heat for the house, heat for cooking, heat stored for later release. There was no room for waste. Meals grew simpler, stretched over days. Thick soups made from beans and roots, flatbreads cooked directly on heated stone, apples softened with honey when she could spare it. There was no frying, no boiling water without purpose. Everything that touched the fire had to justify itself. At first, Noah complained quietly, his disappointment restrained but real. Erin listened without scolding. She explained why portions mattered, why they could not afford carelessness. She did not dramatize it. She trusted him to understand, and he did. He learned to eat slowly, to notice flavors rather than seek fullness. He began to ask questions about quantities, about how much wood a fire consumed, about how long the walls stayed warm after the flames died down. Erin answered when she could, admitted when she could not. Days settled into a precise rhythm. Mornings were for checking the hearth, clearing ash, selecting wood. Afternoons for gathering water, maintaining storage, repairing small things that loosened under the strain of weather. Evenings for cooking, then retreating inside as darkness fell and the cold pressed closer. Inside the house, time behaved differently. Without screens or clocks, hours were marked by light and sensation. The walls warmed gradually after each fire, releasing heat long after the hearth had gone dark. The neighbors returned occasionally, drawn by curiosity and concern. Their tones shifted as winter deepened. Laughter faded, replaced by skepticism edged with worry. They asked if Erin had reconsidered staying, if she understood how much colder it would get. She listened, nodded, thanked them. She felt no need to persuade. The house was not a statement. It was a condition. As winter tightened its grip, Erin became aware of a subtle change. The house still held its temperature, but the margin narrowed. The cold outside grew more aggressive, pressing against the structure with greater insistence. The response inside slowed. The warmth lingered, but not as generously. Erin noticed it first in her hands, then in the way her breath lingered faintly when she stood still. She adjusted her routine, feeding the fire more carefully, conserving wood while maintaining balance. Doubt crept in quietly. Had she underestimated the severity of the winter? Had she misread the house's responses, mistaken consistency for resilience? Had her grandmother accounted for conditions like these? Or had she simply been fortunate? The questions circled without resolution. The house offered no reassurance. It did not change in response to her fear. It remained as it was, steady and indifferent. The pressure intensified when two men from the local administration arrived one afternoon, their boots leaving deep impressions in the snow. They spoke politely, their voices measured, but their questions carried an edge. They asked about permits, about safety standards, about the suitability of the dwelling for a child. They did not step inside. They did not need to. Their concerns were already formed. Erin answered carefully, presenting documents, emphasizing that the house predated current regulations and had been continuously inhabited. She did not mention the power outage, did not emphasize how little the house relied on external systems. Competence, she sensed, could be mistaken for defiance. When they left, they offered no reassurance, only the promise of follow-up. That night, Erin slept poorly. The weight of responsibility pressed harder than the cold ever could. She lay awake, listening to Noah breathe, acutely aware that her choices affected not only her own comfort, but his safety, his future. Doubt moved from the background to the foreground, influencing every thought. The first major storm arrived without warning. Wind drove snow sideways, piling it against the walls, pressing into every exposed surface. The sound was relentless, a constant hiss punctuated by sudden impacts as gusts struck stone and wood. Inside, the temperature began to drop, not dangerously, not catastrophically, but enough to demand attention. Erin added wood to the fire, careful not to overdo it. She waited. The response was slower than before. The walls absorbed the heat, but the cold outside seemed to draw it away more aggressively. Panic flickered at the edges of her thoughts. She forced it down, focusing instead on observation. She moved through the space, placing her hand against the walls and floor, mapping warmth and coolness with deliberate attention. She noticed then what she had dismissed before. The center of the room remained warmer. The edges cooled faster. Noah watched her quietly, alert. When she paused, he pointed out the same pattern she was tracing, confirming what she had only half acknowledged. They made it through the storm without crisis. The temperature dipped, then stabilized. The house did not fail, but the incident stripped away her remaining illusions about control. Survival here was not guaranteed by effort alone. It depended on understanding systems that did not explain themselves readily. As the storm passed and winter settled back into its slow, relentless pressure, Erin understood that the house had not yet revealed everything it had to teach. The days after the storm passed with an uneasy stillness. Winter did not retreat. It simply paused, as if considering its next move. The land remained locked beneath snow hardened by wind, its surface brittle and resistant. The light through the narrow windows of the house grew thinner, sharper, stripped of the muted softness Aaron had grown used to. Inside, the temperature held, but only just. The margin that had once allowed her to breathe more easily had narrowed to something precise and demanding. Erin moved through her routines with exaggerated care. Each action carried weight now. She measured wood by feel rather than habit, chose logs not by size alone, but by density and dryness. She timed the fire instinctively, feeding it neither too quickly nor too late. The house responded, but its answers felt slower, as though the system were asking her to pay closer attention rather than offering reassurance. It no longer tolerated approximation. Noah's cough returned quietly without drama. It was not severe, not the kind that would have alarmed her in the city. But here, where isolation magnified every risk, it sharpened her fear. She watched him constantly, adjusting his blankets, positioning him closer to where the air felt steadier. She told herself she was being cautious, not panicked, but the distinction blurred with each hour. The house remained steady, but her confidence in her understanding of it did not. At night, sleep came in fragments. Erin woke often, listening not just for sounds but for absences. The walls no longer felt generous. They still held warmth, but it was thinner, less forgiving of mistakes. Doubt settled heavily in her thoughts. She replayed every decision she had made since arriving, searching for the moment where she might have misunderstood something essential. Had she assumed too much? Had she trusted appearances rather than mechanisms? The visits from the administration returned, this time more pointed. 2 men and a woman arrived on a gray afternoon, their coats heavy with snow. Their language was careful, professional, but it carried an implication of inevitability. They spoke of inspections, of concerns raised by neighbors, of the presence of a child in a dwelling that did not conform to modern standards. Erin answered as she had before, calmly presenting documents, emphasizing continuity of habitation and structural stability. She did not mention Noah's cough. She did not mention the narrowing margin of warmth. Vulnerability, she sensed, would invite intervention rather than assistance. When they left, the air inside the house felt heavier, not colder, but burdened by the awareness that pressure now came from more than weather alone. Noah sensed the shift. He stayed close, quieter than usual, his attention fixed on her movements. That evening, as Erin tended the fire, he stood nearby, watching the flames with a seriousness that mirrored her own. When he asked whether the cold ever truly stopped, she understood that he was asking more than a question about temperature. She answered honestly, telling him that it changed, and that they would have to change with it. The wind rose again that night, different from before. It did not strike the house head-on, but slid along its curved surfaces, testing them patiently. Snow piled higher against the walls, pressing into every shallow contour. Inside, the temperature dropped further than Erin had experienced yet. She added wood carefully, aware that desperation could waste fuel without improving comfort. The warmth returned, but unevenly. Near the walls, the air cooled quickly. Near the center of the room, it remained denser, steadier, as though anchored to something unseen. Erin began to move through the space deliberately, mapping it with her body. She knelt, pressed her hands against the floor, then her cheek. The difference was unmistakable. The heat near the center was not surface warmth. It felt deeper, slower, as if it were rising from below rather than radiating outward from the walls. She remembered Noah's earlier observations, the ones she had dismissed as coincidence. The memory unsettled her now, demanding reconsideration. At the heart of the room lay a stone slab set flush with the floor, its edges softened by wear. Erin had noticed it before, assumed it was part of the foundation, a structural anchor. Now it drew her attention with quiet insistence. She did not touch it immediately. Interfering with something she did not understand felt dangerous. The house had offered shelter without explanation. Disturbing it carried risks she could not yet measure. That night, Noah's cough worsened. It was still not dramatic, but it sharpened her fear into something immediate and unavoidable. She sat beside him, listening to his breathing, her hand resting on the floor near his sleeping niche. The warmth there was steady and deep, unlike anywhere else in the house. She pressed harder, feeling not surface heat but something stored beneath. The realization hovered just beyond certainty, waiting for confirmation. The storm that followed removed any remaining hesitation. It arrived at dusk, the sky darkening abruptly as wind shifted direction with force that felt deliberate. Snow fell thick and fast, reducing visibility to a few steps. The sound outside grew overwhelming, a continuous roar that pressed against the house from every side. Inside, the temperature dropped steadily, not catastrophically, but enough to make inaction dangerous. Aaron fed the fire carefully, conserving wood while maintaining heat. The response was sluggish. The walls absorbed warmth, but released it grudgingly, as if the cold were drawing it away faster than before. Noah's breathing grew labored. Panic surged, sharp and immediate. Aaron forced it down, focusing instead on what the house was telling her. The center remained warm. The stone slab radiated heat that did not dissipate as quickly as the rest of the floor. There was no longer time to hesitate. She cleared the space around the slab, pushing aside the low table, rolling up the thin rug that softened the floor. The stone revealed itself fully, its surface worn smooth, its outline precise. She searched for seams, for leverage points, finding them only when she stopped looking for the obvious. With effort, she pried at the edge. The slab resisted, then shifted slightly, releasing a breath of warmer air from beneath. The sensation was immediate and undeniable. Heat rose slowly but steadily, carrying the smell of earth and stone rather than smoke. Noah sat up, watching silently, his eyes wide. The slab moved inch by inch, heavy but not immovable. Beneath it, a cavity opened, lined with stone and clay. Its surfaces were darkened, not by fire, but by years of absorbed warmth. The air that emerged was dense, alive with stored heat. Aaron felt it on her face, on her hands, a deep warmth that did not flicker or fade. In that moment, understanding arrived with a clarity that cut through fear and doubt alike. This was not an afterthought. It was not a feature added out of caution. It was the core of the house. The structure was not merely insulated. It was layered, designed to gather heat from the external fire and hold it at its center, releasing it gradually and evenly, regardless of conditions outside. The walls were only part of the system. The heart lay beneath her feet. She replaced the slab carefully, sealing the cavity once more. Almost immediately, the air inside began to change. The warmth spread outward, slow but decisive, stabilizing the space. Noah's breathing eased, his cough softened, then receded. Aaron sat back on her heels, trembling not from cold, but from the weight of realization. The danger had never been the cold itself. It had been her incomplete understanding. The house had not failed. She had. The storm did not break suddenly. It loosened its grip by degrees, the wind easing first, then the snowfall thinning until individual flakes could be distinguished again instead of experienced as force. Outside, the world reassembled slowly, shapes emerging from the white with tentative clarity. Inside the house, the change was felt before it was seen. The warmth Aaron had restored by opening the hidden core did not surge or fluctuate. It settled into the structure with calm persistence, filling the space evenly, as though the house itself were exhaling after a long restraint. Aaron did not sleep much that night. She remained awake beside Noah, listening not for danger, but for confirmation. His breathing steadied, deepened, lost the strained edge that had tightened her chest with fear. The cough retreated into something distant and infrequent, no longer commanding attention. She rested her hand against the floor near the center of the room and felt the steady warmth rising beneath her palm, reliable and slow. The system worked, not by urgency, not by force, but by design. By dawn, exhaustion pressed heavily on her, but it was a different kind of weariness than before. It was no longer sharpened by panic. It carried weight, but also clarity. The house had not revealed its secret out of generosity. It had responded to necessity, to pressure applied where it was designed to bear it. Aaron understood now that survival here was not about endurance alone. It was about interpretation. The house did not adapt to her fear. It demanded understanding. She rose quietly and tended the external hearth with renewed restraint. The fire accepted the wood without protest, its glow steady rather than eager. She fed it only enough to maintain the cycle she now understood, trusting the mass beneath the floor to do the rest. For the first time since winter had tightened around them, she did not feel compelled to watch the flames constantly. Responsibility had shifted. The house carried part of it now. Later that morning, movement appeared at the edge of the land. Erin noticed it from the doorway, her attention drawn not by sound but by interruption. Shapes emerged through the lingering snow, hunched against the cold, their progress slow and uneven. As they drew closer, she recognized them. Neighbors. They approached without ceremony, without calling out. They gathered near the stone hearth instinctively, hands extended toward the heat, faces drawn and pale. Some carried children wrapped in blankets too thin for the temperature. Others moved stiffly, joints aching from nights spent fighting cold their homes could not keep out. There was no laughter now, no skepticism. Winter had stripped those away. Erin did not invite them inside. The decision came without hesitation, guided not by selfishness, but by reality. The house was not built for crowds. Its balance depended on scale, on the precise relationship between volume, mass, and stored heat. Opening it fully would disrupt that balance and risk everything it was designed to preserve. Instead, she adjusted the fire, increasing it slightly, mindful of the calculations running quietly in her thoughts. The heat radiated outward, creating a pocket of relative safety beneath the stone overhang and the stacked wood that broke the wind. It was not comfort, it was survival. The neighbors rotated positions without being told, sharing warmth with an unspoken cooperation that hardship encouraged more efficiently than kindness ever had. Questions surfaced, murmured rather than demanded. How was the house still warm? Why place the hearth outside? Erin answered minimally, conserving energy, hers and theirs. Explanation could wait. Warmth could not. One child, younger than Noah, shivered uncontrollably despite the blankets. His mother hovered nearby, her eyes flicking between the fire and the house, hope and hesitation warring openly on her face. Erin hesitated only briefly. Inside, space was limited, but not non-existent. She assessed the conditions quickly, the warmth stored at the center of the house, the balance she had only just learned to maintain. One additional small body, still and quiet, could be accommodated temporarily without upsetting the system. More could not. She gestured to the woman and child, guiding them inside with careful efficiency. The warmth surprised them immediately. The boy sagged with relief, his tension dissolving as heat reached him. Erin positioned them near the center of the room, where the temperature was most stable, and made it clear through her actions that this was temporary. The woman understood without argument. Survival bred cooperation faster than comfort ever had. Outside, the others remained by the fire, tending to one another, sharing food when they could spare it. The storm had reduced everyone to the same calculus. Inside the house, Erin became acutely aware of its limits. Each additional person altered the air, the balance of warmth and moisture. She monitored it constantly, adjusting ventilation channels subtly, opening and closing them as needed to manage breath as carefully as heat. The system responded, but it was clear that it was not meant to stretch far beyond its design. By evening, the storm loosened further. The winds softened, snowfall thinning to a quiet drift. The temperature outside remained brutal, but the pressure eased. One by one, the neighbors departed, grateful but subdued. There were no declarations, no promises, only nods and brief words of thanks. Eyes that had once dismissed the house now regarded it with a respect born not of admiration, but of evidence. The woman and child left last. The boy had fallen asleep inside, his breathing deep and even. When his mother carried him back into the cold, she paused at the threshold, meeting Erin's gaze with an expression stripped of pretense. Erin acknowledged it with a nod. There was nothing else to say. That night, the house returned to its intended occupancy. It settled quickly, recalibrating with quiet efficiency. The warmth stabilized at its familiar level. The air dried gradually as moisture from additional bodies dissipated. Erin felt the difference immediately, not as relief, but as confirmation. The system was precise. It tolerated deviation briefly, then demanded correction. She slept for a few hours, waking before dawn with thoughts that refused to remain quiet. Her grandmother's presence pressed in on her memory, no longer as a distant, impractical figure, but as an engineer of circumstance. The house was not a response to solitude. It was a response to unpredictability, to systems that failed without warning, to winters that did not care whether one followed tradition or innovation. The hidden chamber beneath the stone slab lingered in her thoughts. She rose carefully and lifted the slab just enough to feel the heat rise again, steady and patient. The cavity was no longer mysterious. It was legible, its purpose clear. Layers of stone and clay arranged to maximize thermal mass, channels guiding warmth outward with deliberate inefficiency so nothing was wasted. She closed it again gently, almost reverently. Later that day, as the sky cleared and the land lay quiet beneath its covering of snow, Erin searched the storage niches more thoroughly. Behind jars and bundles, tucked into spaces visible only when one knew to look, she found papers wrapped in oilcloth. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, precise and restrained. Diagrams, calculations, notes on seasonal variations, on fuel consumption, on failure points. Letters, too, not addressed to anyone, reading more like arguments with the future than messages to the past. She read them slowly, absorbing the intent behind the structure she now inhabited. The house was never meant to shelter many. It was meant to shelter responsibility. It was designed for one adult and a child, for continuity rather than expansion. The external hearth was not eccentricity. It was separation, a deliberate removal of risk from the living space. The wood storage ring was not convenience. It was insulation, windbreak, and inventory combined. The hidden thermal core was not secrecy. It was insurance, acknowledgement that systems failed most dangerously when they appeared to work until they did not. As night fell, the temperature dropped once more. The house held without adjustment. Noah slept soundly, his earlier illness fading into memory. Erin sat at the low table, papers spread before her, the dome illuminated by soft, indirect light. The house felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. Winter had not ended, but its terms were clearer, and the house had passed its test. Spring did not arrive as an event. There was no morning when Erin woke to birdsong and green shoots pushing confidently through thawed earth. Instead, it came as a sequence of small corrections, so gradual that she noticed them only in retrospect. The light through the narrow windows changed first. It grew whiter, less strained, lingering longer in the afternoon before retreating. Then the snow began to withdraw, not melting away cleanly but receding unevenly, revealing patches of hardened ground and flattened grass that had endured months of pressure in silence. Water followed. At first it was only a sound beneath ice, a faint movement she felt more than heard. Then it became visible, running in thin channels along the slope away from the house, obeying the paths that had been set long before she arrived. The land did not flood. It released itself carefully, guided by the same restraint that defined the house. Erin watched this with a new eye, no longer seeing isolation but design, not abandonment but intention. Inside the house, the change was felt before it was seen. The walls released their stored warmth more readily now, no longer guarding it with the discipline winter had demanded. The air softened, losing the sharp neutrality of cold stone and taking on the smell of earth again. For the first time in months, Erin opened one of the ventilation channels fully and felt no immediate penalty. The system adjusted without complaint. It had endured what it was built to endure. She walked the perimeter of the structure one morning, examining it with care sharpened by experience. The curved log walls showed no cracks, no sagging, no signs of water intrusion. The straw insulation within remained dry, protected by the layers of earth and clay that sealed it against moisture. Where snow had piled high against the exterior, it had melted away without leaving rot or weakness behind. The house had not merely survived the winter, it had emerged unchanged. The external stone hearth stood intact, its surface darkened by use but structurally sound. Ash lay where it should, evidence of fires that had burned steadily rather than violently. The ring of stacked firewood had done its work as well, shedding snow, breaking wind, keeping the remaining logs dry enough to light even after months of exposure. Aaron understood now that nothing here had been placed casually. Every element served more than one purpose, not for efficiency alone, but for resilience. She took inventory again, this time without fear. The food stores were low, but not dangerously so. The calculations recorded in her grandmother's notebooks had been accurate. There was no surplus, but no hunger either. What remained would carry them until the first fresh growth, until she could supplement their meals with what the land offered in warmer months. The last sack of dried beans was lighter now, the honey jar nearly empty, but they had made it through without desperation. Noah had changed in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. The winter had not hardened him, but it had focused him. He moved through the house with familiarity, no longer asking where things belonged or how they worked. He had learned the rhythms of the place as naturally as children learn games, through repetition and observation rather than instruction. He noticed weather shifts before Aaron did, commented on how the light moved across the floor, on how the warmth lingered longer on certain days. He did not speak often about the night of the storm, about the child who had slept inside their home, about the neighbors who had gathered around the fire. When he did, it was without drama. Those events had not frightened him. They had taught him something more lasting, that safety was not guaranteed by numbers or by proximity to others. It was guaranteed by preparation. As the roads softened and travel became easier, the neighbors returned. They came singly or in pairs now, not as a crowd. The laughter that had once followed Aaron's arrival was gone entirely. In its place was a careful respect that did not demand explanation. They asked questions, but they asked them differently than before. Not with dismissal, but with attention. How had the house held its heat so evenly? Why place the hearth outside? How had the wood stayed dry all winter? Aaron answered what she could. She showed them the external systems, the way the wood ring worked with the wind rather than against it, how the hearth was positioned to radiate heat safely and efficiently. She did not invite them inside unless it was necessary. The house remained private, its scale unsuitable for demonstration. Some things she sensed had to be understood rather than copied. Without that understanding, replication would only repeat the mistakes her grandmother had spent a lifetime avoiding. The local administration returned as well, but their language had shifted. There were still references to regulations and standards, but the tone had changed. They had seen the state of other homes after the winter, the damage, the cost of repairs, the strain on already limited resources. Aaron's house stood as a contradiction they could not easily dismiss. She presented her grandmother's papers calmly, the diagrams and calculations now familiar to her. She spoke not of ideology or innovation, but of function, of a structure that had been inhabited continuously, safely, without reliance on external systems, of a system that did not burden infrastructure already stretched thin. They did not argue. They asked for copies. When they left, there was no threat of inspection, no suggestion that Noah should not be there. The house had proven its legitimacy not through compliance, but through endurance. In the quieter days that followed, Aaron read the remaining notes her grandmother had left behind. They were not sentimental. There were no expressions of regret or longing. The writing was practical, almost austere, concerned with variables and constraints. But threaded through it was a clear philosophy. The house was not meant to be admired, it was meant to be used. Loretta Walker had written about scale, about the danger of building larger than necessary, about how every additional volume demanded energy, attention, and risk. She had written about comfort being mistaken for security, and about how systems designed for convenience failed most dramatically under pressure. She had written about children, not in terms of affection, but of responsibility. About building for those who could not choose their circumstances, who depended on decisions made before they were capable of understanding them. Reading those words, Aaron felt something settle inside her. The inheritance had not removed struggle from her life. It had reframed it. She no longer measured stability by income alone, by proximity to services, by the appearance of normalcy. She measured it by resilience, by the ability to respond when conditions deteriorated. As spring advanced, Aaron began to plan not an escape, but a future. She marked places where she could grow food, where the soil, though poor, could be improved with patience. She considered small additions to the external systems, not expansions of the house itself, but complementary structures that respected its scale. A covered workspace, a larger water catchment, improvements that did not compromise the balance her grandmother had established. Noah helped, asking questions that reflected curiosity rather than fear. He had stopped asking when they would leave. One evening, as the sun set later than it had all winter, Erin sat outside near the stone hearth, now cold and silent. The air was mild enough that she did not need to light a fire. Behind her, the house held the last of the day's warmth, releasing it slowly into the cooling evening. She thought of the laughter that had once followed her arrival, of the dismissive looks, the certainty that she had made a mistake. She thought of how easily tradition had been mistaken for wisdom, and how fragile that assumption had proven when conditions changed. Her grandmother had not rejected the past. She had refined it. She had taken what worked and discarded what did not, regardless of how familiar it felt to others. The realization settled fully now, not as gratitude alone, but as responsibility passed forward. The house did not ask to be replicated. It did not promise comfort or ease. It offered something more difficult and more durable, the ability to endure without depending on illusions. As darkness fell, the land grew quiet. Winter was over, but its lessons remained, embedded not only in the structure of the house, but in the way Erin now thought, planned, and chose. She was no longer a woman waiting for circumstances to improve. She was someone who understood how to live when they did not. The house stood beside her, modest and unremarkable to an untrained eye, as proof that sometimes the most enduring inheritance was not property or wealth, but precision carried forward through generations. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. More stories like this are already waiting for you, and new ones are coming soon. Watch the next video to continue exploring worlds where quiet choices matter and small details change everything. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who would